Hey everyone, and welcome to the Phileas Club. This is episode 119, and we talk to Shawn about what it means to be a minister. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Phileas Club. In this show, we cover the news from the past month or so, and we discuss it with people from different parts of the world. We get different opinions, different perspectives, different backgrounds, and we try to tackle the news from those different backgrounds, and hopefully we all learn something in the process. My name is Patrick Beja, and the phone ringing in the background is that of Shawn Coons, who's joining me for the first time in forever. And I'll get to you in a second. I just want to say today is not a regular episode where we cover the news. It's a special where we talk to one person about one thing, and that is essentially being a priest. And I understand you're not a priest, you're a minister. But we're going to be talking about that. For me, it's all the same. You talk to God and tell us what we should do. Right? That's how it works?
Yeah, I mean, you just kind of ruined the whole episode there. Thanks for listening.
Well, before we do that, there are going to be a couple of things. First, we're going to indulge in a little bit of nostalgia with Shawn because we've been friends for a very long time, and I want to reminisce for a second. Then I'm going to be talking about the yellow vests for a bit. And then, not too long, but then we're going to dive into the show. So, Shawn, I haven't spoken to you in forever. We used to podcast all the time together, and then for some reason we stopped.
We did, yeah. That was back in the day when I was like a D- level podcasting celebrity. And yeah, we did a little show called How I Wow for about a year, and that was fun. We got to talk to lots of interesting people, and you and I got to talk, and sometimes it was about World of Warcraft, and at other times it was about whatever the heck we wanted to talk about.
That's true. You even came on the Phileas Club once, I think, when we were talking about atheism, or not. No, I can't remember, but you were on the show once or twice. And then I got a real job, and then you became busy with your family, which, by the way, aren't you supposed to be celibate? Like, isn't that? It's weird what you do.
Yeah. We can get into that.
Yes, we will. And so we'll talk about all of this. But you've been doing okay, I hope. Everything fine? The children growing up?
Yeah, like I say, when we started this, I think I was the father of a 3-year-old when we did our podcast. Today, I'm the father of 2 teenagers. And
how old is Ben?
Ben, my son, is 13, and he is in 7th grade.
Oh my God! Was it 10 years ago? I guess it must have been because I got my job.
2008.
Jeez.
Yeah, he came downstairs after waking up today, and my wife says, "I think he's taller than you. He's almost as tall as me, and he may be as tall as me now. I'm 6 foot, and he's almost 6 foot."
Okay.
I have a daughter who's also 13, but she's by adoption from Ethiopia, so that's why they aren't twins. And if you saw them, you would realize that
they are twins indeed. So, I don't know if you say her name. I was going to say her name. I did say Ben though, so I'm sorry. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Birdie is her name.
Okay. Well, there you go. And we might touch on that as well during the episode. But I'm really glad everything seems to be going well. I'm a bit sad that you left the podcasting community, but I'm looking forward to our discussion and the reintroduction of Shawn Coons to the world of podcasts. So we're going to do that in a little bit. And before we do, I did want to say a few words about the Yellow Vests. If people don't know, it's a series of protests. It's a spontaneous group that has appeared in France. I say spontaneous because it doesn't follow a political party. It's just a group of citizens that organize on Facebook and that are very unhappy with the current government and the current economic situation. And I'm sure many of you have heard about the essentially riots that happened last week on Saturday in Paris, just near my house, actually, my studio apartment. I made the choice to get a tiny place in a very fancy part of town, and of course, it's near the Champs-Élysées, and the Champs-Élysées was essentially a battle zone last Saturday. There are a lot of questions about what's going to be happening this Saturday. So I will make a short report for the patrons. So if you support this show on Patreon, which by the way you should, you'll have access to this early. Before everyone else does, early next week. And I want to wait to see what happens this Saturday before I do that. But essentially, for people to understand what it is, it's a lot of people that didn't benefit from globalization, just like the people who are unhappy in the UK, in the US. You know, the UK gave the Brexit, and in the US it gave the election of Trump, which both were completely unexpected. Our president dodged essentially a bullet with the last election, and now the bullet has reappeared. I'll go into more detail in my report for the patrons in a few days, but they are very unhappy about a lot of things that are difficult to pinpoint, but they are also shining a light on the situation of some people that are essentially invisible to everyone in society, in the media, and that we're discovering now exists in France as they do in every country, and that are the fuel of the nationalist movements everywhere. And in France, it takes the form of, the far right and the far left, but neither of those parties managed to rally up the troops, because they just happened about a month ago through social media organization voicing their opinions. And the origin of the discontent was an increase in fuel tax, which has since been canceled. But of course, it's hard to put the genie back in a bottle, and it might lead to significant changes in the government, in the way we conduct politics in the country. And so it's not all dark, it's not all white. Of course, the violence is unconscionable, or at least it is uncondonable, and no one condones it, including most of the representatives of that movement, which doesn't really have official representatives, which makes all of this very complicated to follow. It's more akin, as I said last episode, to something like Occupy Wall Street, where it's just a bunch of people unhappy and you don't know who to talk to, what they want specifically, etc., etc. So it's the same kind of difficult situation to resolve. And I'll go more into the causes and what I think is going to happen. But essentially what I want to point out is that it might be a good thing that this happens now, if we can fix it, or if we can try to alleviate it, and not during an election. And I will argue that point a little bit further when I do my report. So that's about it for the
Can I ask you a question, Patrick?
Oh, sure. Please do.
So I was trying to educate myself. As I told you before, I was trying not to be the ignorant American and understand. You said yellow vests, and I thought it was something with the Tour de France or something. Isn't there something yellow, the yellow shirt? Is that right?
Yes, yellow shirt is the first place for the Tour de France, yes.
But this isn't like a gathering of former Tour de France winners that are riding, right?
No, I don't think so. They might be Tour de France enthusiasts, but I don't think they all won. There's hundreds of thousands of them, so it's doubtful it would be.
Okay. So I'm reading up and understanding that part of it is this fuel tax that has to do with climate change that may disproportionately affect rural folks and folks who may not be able to afford it. But there was one line in one of the articles I read that said something like that they were protesting for broader tax cuts and, what was the other thing? And more benefits or.
Yeah. So the problem, it's something that I think no one really saw coming, except those who profited from it. And it's the issue. I don't think it's an issue of straight up objective poor situation. Obviously, it's the lower social classes that are affected. But if you look at things, from let's say basic well-being, they have food, they have shelter, and it might be difficult for some of them to reach the end of the month without being in the red in the bank account, but mostly, they don't starve, right? And they don't die of illness. So it's not like there's a plague that is decimating some people, or that they're dying of famine, right? That's not the situation. And I think I was guilty of this a few years ago, thinking, well, everyone is being lifted up in society, and so it's good for everyone, right? And what I didn't realize, that I've since realized, partly thanks to this show and talking to different people and exploring different ideas, is that it's not the problem isn't who is objectively better off. The problem is the distinction between those who are very well off and those who aren't, and the disappearance or the thinning of the middle class. And I think this is my theory. I'm sure many others have said something like this and come to the same conclusion. It doesn't matter how much you survive or even how much money you have. If you see that someone else has a lot more and you feel like you're being disproportionately impacted by issues, then you're going to be pissed off. And that's human nature. That's survival. Like it's a survival instinct. It's scientifically proven that fairness is an innate human sentiment. You feel like, and I could talk about different studies and different experiments that prove this, but essentially, if you think you're getting the short end of the stick or of a deal, and there's no discernible reason for it, you're going to be pissed off. And that's why in stable societies, you need a very strong middle class. I've talked about this before in this show. You can't have very rich and very poor. Even if the very poor, you're thinking, well, what are they complaining about? They can buy smartphones. They have big TVs. They have like it, and some of them don't. Obviously, I don't want to diminish the idea or convey the idea that those people rioting are all driving Mercedes cars and like living in luxury. It's absolutely not the case. Some of them are in very difficult situations. But if you see that some people are getting all the money and you're getting the scraps, no matter what the scraps are, you're going to be unhappy. And I think that's what's been happening everywhere. And that's what's happening here as well. So what do they want? They want the system to be less unfair. And that, I think, whether or not you think it's legitimate, it doesn't matter. We need everyone to be in the middle class. If that means lifting up some people or bringing down some people, that's what you need to do. Because if you don't, then you're going to have social unrest everywhere. And the social unrest is going to take different forms. But yeah, I think that's the conclusion I'm at right now.
Okay. That's interesting. I'm going to have to give that some thought. That idea that no matter where you are, how well you're doing, if it's unfair, you're not going to feel. You could be doing very well or moderately well, but if there's unfairness, you're not going to be satisfied.
Right. And I think that echoes something that I think it was Newt Gingrich who said something like that before the election of Donald Trump. And it was talking about, facts and sentiment. And he was saying, people feel like whatever it is, there are too many immigrants, or they feel like they're worse off than their parents were, and the journalist arguing with him was saying, but that's provably untrue. Standards of living have risen. You're less sick. You're more literate. You're more rich, etc., etc. And Gingrich answered, yes, but they don't feel that way. Or it was something like, but they feel the situation is different. And at the time, I kind of laughed it off. I was like, what is he talking about? They don't feel. There's reality. It doesn't matter what they feel. Reality is this or that way. And that's truth, right? But what we're seeing now is that the way people feel matters a great deal, even if that sentiment isn't, and it's a little bit of a different thing, but
yeah. I mean, what's interesting in that situation is that the unfairness is directed down with your Trump supporters. It's not directed up towards the upper class, towards the rich. It's directed down towards the immigrants and people who are different and minorities and Me Too folks, all these people who are keeping me, the average Trump supporter, from I would be a millionaire if it wasn't for them. I would be like these rich people.
I don't quite agree. I think there is some of that, of course. I think there's a mixture of some of what I'm talking about, and also an issue with identity. In the U.S. especially, identity politics plays into this. In France, a little bit less. It's more a matter of pure immigration. But I would argue that the sentiment that fuels even more of the right in the U.S. right now is also targeted at the elite. And I think there's a disregard for it's two similar ideas in this at the same time in one head, or two opposing ideas, because obviously Trump is part of the elite, but
it's not financial elite, though. I would say.
I think it goes hand in hand in the mind of many people.
I read, and I can't remember, this is several years ago, I read a really interesting article that said, or maybe it was a Twitter thread probably, that a lot of the Trump supporters, especially the poor Trump supporters, consider themselves, and the phrase was, temporarily embarrassed millionaires.
I think there might be some of that, sure. But I was talking about class. And and the elite, the West Coast, the coastal elites are seen high, upper middle class or upper class. And I think that's what they resent more. And maybe it doesn't, I'm just talking out of my buttocks here, but maybe it doesn't take the exact form that I'm talking about. But I certainly think that they look at people who are well off, educated, and who think they are better, and that everyone should join their class, kind of.
Sure.
And they think, well, we are not part of that, and the gap is widening, and we don't like it, and we don't like you. So I think there's a lot of, anyway.
Right, but if you happen to be the owner, CEO, or executive in Hobby Lobby, Chick-fil-A, Walmart, someone who's made your way, pulled yourself up in your bootstraps, and now you have $1 billion. I don't think there's that. I think you're given a pass by a lot of folks.
Sure.
Versus if you're the Harvard-educated liberal Hollywood elite.
Yeah, I mean, it's not 100% scenario, but I think
I want it to be black and white, Patrick. Let's just, remember, I'm a religious guy. It's only God's way or
the highway.
I don't see any shades of gray.
Well, you know what? Let's talk about that a little bit more. Let's get into the actual show itself and talk about you, Shawn, because
favorite subject.
You were joking that you didn't want to be the ignorant American. I'm gonna be a little bit of the ignorant atheist here. And because I don't even know what the difference is between you and a priest. The Catholic Church is very complicated. So you're a minister. What does that even mean? Like, where do you stand in the great map of religions?
All right. So I'll, during this conversation, you stop me if I'm being too simplistic. You stop me if if I'm assuming knowledge that and speaking churchy. So I'm going to paint broad brushstrokes here, and your listeners can reach me on Twitter and tell me why I'm wrong. But you have Christianity, a couple billion people, and you've got three main flavors of Christianity. You've got your Catholic Church, got your Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox, and then you've got Protestants.
So far, I understand what you said.
All right, great. I'm in the Protestant tradition. Now, within that, you've got all sorts of different things, and I don't know how important it is to go there. We can talk a little bit later maybe about evangelical versus not. That may be interesting or not.
So evangelical are people who want to evangelize and bring the word of Jesus to other people and convert them.
Yeah. I mean, essentially, yeah. It's going to be your more conservative, especially politically in America nowadays. There's questions on whether evangelical really relates, how much it relates to Christianity and how much it relates to politics and culture. So yeah, I'm in the Protestant tradition. I am in a Presbyterian minister, the specific denomination. There are lots of Presbyterian denominations, flavors within flavors. And mine is Presbyterian Church USA. We're a couple million folks gathered together in a structure that we have a government system within our church. And I, as a minister, can't do whatever I want. My church can't do whatever we want. But we decide together. It is not like the Catholic Church that's hierarchical, where what the Pope says goes. We vote at every level, from the church up to our national level, on the rules we follow and beliefs and things like that. So
what does Presbyterian stand for? I mean, what does it mean to be Presbyterian as opposed to evangelical, or are there evangelical Presbyterians?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what does it mean to be Presbyterian within the Protestant family or flavor?
It comes out of the Reformed tradition, which comes out of the Reformation. So Martin Luther was the Reformation. Then there's a subset of that, which is the Reformed tradition, John Calvin, Zwingli, some other folks. I don't know how far into the weeds we need to go there.
No, but I mean, what in ideas, policies, standards differentiates you from
all right, the easiest way to start is our church government. As I said before, at every level of our government, we take votes. We go right Robert's Rules of Order. In some ways, it's similar to United States government. There were several Presbyterian ministers who signed, or maybe several. John Witherspoon is one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. He was a Presbyterian minister. Some people say the U.S. system was partially based off Presbyterian government. I think that's just blowing smoke up our ass. But I'm sorry.
Ooh,
I shouldn't say that.
You said a bad word. So you're you're liberal, right? You're
a
liberal guy.
Personally, I'm liberal politically and theologically, although I have some interesting quirks here and there that don't fall quite in line. My denomination, Presbyterian Church USA, we are more slightly left of center as well, although that depends on the church. Okay. One of the things about being Presbyterian is, at least our particular flavor of Presbyterian, is we don't say you have to believe these 5 things. You know, these are what you have to believe in order to be Presbyterian. The way, when I'm kind of explaining it, the way I say is think of a soccer match, a football match, if you will. And you have a field, and there are things that are in bounds and out of bounds. And no matter where you are on that field, as long as you're in bounds, you're good to go.
But what defines your inbounds?
Sure. And for Presbyterians, we kind of have that, although the lines are kind of fuzzy. But you don't have to be right here on the field or right here on the field. You know, you can be way over here, you can way over here. So, and the way we define it is through creeds and confessions, historic statements of the church going back to the Apostles' Creed, you know, going back 1,500 years or more, to statements of today. And we have, I think we're at 11 right now over the last 1,500 years or so. And we say these are kind of snapshots. These are pictures of what the church believed at certain times. And some of them are 2 paragraphs, some of them are 20 pages. And we say these are snapshots and they reflect the historic beliefs, and we affirm the church in these moments. Now, we don't hold exactly to all of those. One of them, the Scots Confession, says that women shouldn't baptize babies. We don't believe that. In the Presbyterian Church, women can be ministers as well. But we say these kind of hold up the essentials of what we believe. And so we'll paint in broad brushstrokes.
So let's start with the big stuff. I'm guessing you have to believe in God in order to be part of your church.
Right. So I teach, we call it confirmation class. It's when usually about somewhere around teenage years, we have kids in the church and we invite them to consider joining the church as full members, that they're old enough to understand what it means. In the Presbyterian Church, we baptize infants. And because we believe, theologically speaking, we believe God takes the action towards us, that it's not so much about our response to God, that God is sovereign is the word we use, and that sorry, we're going to go into salvation here, and that's a loaded word as well, but
no, that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah, but essentially, and I will say salvation can mean many different things. It's not just you get to go up in heaven and get your wings and harp and fly around, but
so what
we believe it's God's. We're not so big, at least my branch of Presbyterians, on like converting people, because we believe, God created us, God loves us, and God will deal fairly with us and lovingly with us in life, death, and after death.
Okay, so I'm first. I think you're touching the mic a little bit. We can hear it. So if you can,
sorry.
Right. But I'm going to take you to task a little bit. You're being very evasive, and I'm going to ask you some hard questions. Okay?
Please do.
Do you think there's sin? Do you believe in the cardinal sin? Do you think there's a soul that goes to heaven? And do you think there's hell? These big essential ideas of the church, which... I mean, you didn't answer my question, but I'm guessing, yes, you have to believe in God to be a Presbyterian.
Yes.
And what follows from that... Right. What follows from that
going with that, I would say I'll even get a little more specific on that. So when our kids join the church, one of the one kind of thing I say, there's one requirement to join the Presbyterian Church. You have to say that you believe in Jesus as your Lord and Savior.
Okay.
Now, then I go on to say, I'm not going to tell you exactly what Savior means. I'm not going to tell you exactly what Lord means. I'm not going to tell you what you have to believe about Jesus. Now, here's where that field comes in. If you say, well, Jesus is my Lord and Savior, I think Jesus is an alien who hails from the planet Theta millions of years ago and wants me to
grow palm trees,
Christmas lights.
Right.
Then I'm going to say you're probably out of bounds. You're probably not Presbyterian. And now I'm going to say, and I think a lot of Presbyterians will say, that doesn't mean you're a bad person. It doesn't mean God doesn't love you. It just means you're not Presbyterian.
Okay.
For us, being Presbyterian is not the same as being Christian. We recognize all sorts of different traditions, and we recognize there may be many paths to God. This is the one we know, and this is the one we're more certain of, so we're going to teach it, but maybe there's other ways to God.
So, but we still, the ultimate goal is still to get to heaven if we're a good person, isn't it?
I would say no.
I mean, maybe not the goal, but what happens after death? Do you go to heaven?
I mean, that's the traditional teaching in the church. But if you go back through Scripture and as you go back through the teaching of the church, there are many different understandings of this life, of the next life. A lot of Scripture talks about the kingdom of God here on earth now, a new heaven and a new earth coming here. The idea is that the traditional understanding is there's a body and a soul, and our souls are just temporarily inhabiting our bodies. One of the things we teach in Presbyterian tradition is that you aren't a body and a soul. I mean, what are we without our bodies? I mean, that is us. We are a being just created. And so no, and part of Scripture teaches, and depending how literally you take it, that we will be resurrected bodily, and we will have our bodies in a next life. Now, like I say, I tend to be more kind of progressive Christian, and I think a lot of this is human understanding of divine things. I don't believe the Bible is the words directly dictated by God. I believe it's people who had real encounters with the divine and with the community of the divine, which sometimes may be more important. And they tried as best they could in human ways to pass that along to us. So I'm not going to go ahead.
So you think that the Word of God and the Bible are interpretations of something that is difficult to explain?
Yeah, something that is real, but difficult to explain, if not impossible to explain.
So you don't know that there's a heaven our souls go to after we die if we've been good?
Yes.
Yes, you don't know. Yes. Okay.
Right.
So
I mean, I've preached a number of funerals. That's a regular part of my job. And what I say is that God created us all. God loves us all. If death is a river we cross over, God owns the land on both sides, and there's nowhere we can go to escape God. And the one who knows us and loves us will always deal mercifully and loving with us wherever we are in life or death.
Okay. Some people, does God relinquish his love for some people if they're being really, I keep using the words good and bad. I'm sorry. It's obviously fine. A simplistic way of looking at it. But for the sake of the argument, if we're being bad, does God think, well, maybe when you die, you don't go to the cool, other side of the river that I own. Something else happens to you. Do you have to earn your place at God's side?
All right, Patrick, you have a child, right?
I do.
All right. What would make you stop loving that child?
So far, I was going to
not necessarily not liking that child.
Right.
I have two teenagers. What would make you stop loving that child?
I guess it would have to be seriously bad, like Hitler level bad, or Pol Pot or whatever. And even then, I understand where you're going.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the image I come back to as of a parent. I will never stop loving my children. Now, they could do things. This morning I'm reading the paper. We had a school shooting less than a year ago, about 10 miles from here. Middle school kid walked in and shot up, and that's going through the system. And I wonder about that parents. Well, how do the parents feel towards their kid who, tried to kill people? I bet they still love him. Now, they can't stand his actions, and they're going to do everything they want, hopefully, a loving parent would, out of love to have them see that. But if we're talking, let's go to hell. I'll go firmly on record with a lot of Christians, and actually this goes back as early as Christianity. There's no way a loving God is going to say to someone, "I'm going to punish you eternally." That's just silly.
Okay.
Now, people will argue with me about, well, you don't know what holiness means, and God is holy, so can't abide sin. Like holiness is matter, and sin is antimatter, and if the two get together, there's some Star Trek level explosion. That's just silly.
Okay. All right. So I think I'm starting to see some vague contours of your system of belief. I'd like to take a step back for just a second and kind of ask you, how did you decide, maybe some more practical stuff, how did you decide you wanted to be a minister? And in asking that, I will kind of take you to task again, because, I like video games. It seems you've kind of taken the easy mode of being of wearing the cloth, because where I come from, it's mostly Catholics, and they don't, they have to be celibate. They have to, there's a bunch of stuff, but celibacy is the one that comes to mind. You get to have sex, you have children, you have a family. That's some people might say it's cheating, but leaving that aside for a second, I'm bringing it up because I'm wondering if that you might have taken a different path if wearing the cloth might have meant you have to forego all of these things. But how did it happen? Were your parents religious? Did you hear God speak to you one day? How did you decide to become a minister?
Sure, that's a good question. My parents weren't essentially religious. My folks were divorced when I was 2, so I lived with my mom growing up, and we didn't go to church, but we knew which church we didn't go to. So,
okay.
But somewhere around my junior high, middle school years, that's 6th, 7th grade, I got invited to a youth group at a Presbyterian church. So a weekly gathering where a bunch of middle schoolers come and play games and be goofy. And then there's also some kind of Bible study and worship going on.
So that's how they get you. They invite you when you're young and malleable, and they tell you, hey, have fun with your friends. Also, have you heard about God?
That's it. That's it. Those devious Christians.
Damn it! I want to make you answer in an outburst of anger, and clearly I'm not going to manage.
No, you're going to have to do better than that.
All right.
There are ways to do it. Maybe I'll give you my triggers a little bit later.
Fair enough.
So yeah, I started hanging out, and it was a lot of fun, and I tolerated the Bible study and worship part. But after a while, I'm like, okay, yeah, this sort of makes sense, and I will admit, you are malleable when you're young, and if other people are doing it around you, and especially some people, they had a lot of college students as volunteer leaders, and they were really cool to a 7th grader. So yeah, I mean, am I Christian because that is the best choice, and I would have been Christian no matter where I grew up in the world? No, that's silly, but it is what it is. But for me, I think one of the reasons that I became Christian, became a minister, and stuck with it is the community. I mean, I believe there's something incredibly important about a community of faith, and I will say about any community. It's not necessarily just Christian or just religious, but there's something important about a community to support you, a community to have fun with, community to fall back on when you are in a time of crisis, and for me, a community to act as some sort of guiding moral guidance, have some authority. And for me, that's why it's a religious community that's important to me. I like that sense of authority, that sense of, one of the things about Presbyterian tradition is we believe that we're kind of tainted by sin, if you will. And one of the things that tainted is our judgment. And so we don't always know right from wrong on our own. And I can look at my life just period growing up until now, and totally I'm not always the best judge of what's right and wrong in a given situation. So one thing faith does, and especially a community of faith does, is help you kind of find some common moral ground. So anyway, all right, so that all started kind of making sense. Being part of the community and my church, especially this youth group committee growing up, was great. I continued kind of being part of that through college, and eventually decided that I wanted to be a part of that. And I had so much fun being in the youth part of it that I said, I want to do this. I want to be a youth director. I want to work in a church and hang out with youth and bring them together and have fun, but also teach them about Christian faith. And so that led me to seminary. In my tradition, to do youth director, you don't have to have any special credentials, but I felt it was important to know a little bit more about my tradition and to get some some education about education techniques and things like that. So I went for a very short program, a 2-year program, and this was not to be a minister. But then within my first semester at seminary, I'm starting to take some classes. One, it was the first time through high school, through college, that I'd ever enjoyed my classes, and I did well without trying as much. And I really loved the academic part of it. And for Presbyterians, that's one of the things we ask our ministers. We ask them to have studied for seminary, but to take a year of Greek, a year of Hebrew, to do some reading and translating from, we don't have original texts of the Bible, but the earliest texts we have. And so it was through that academic part that made me wanted to go on and become a minister. And I still wanted to work with youth, and I didn't want to necessarily be, the typical minister person. And so that's.
Wait, what do you mean the typical minister person?
I wanted to be, like I say, I wanted to be a youth director. I didn't want to be the guy up on Sunday morning worship, preaching and leading worship, doing a sermon, wearing the robe or the collar. And
you don't do that?
I do now. But early on, I focused, I did that sometimes, but more often my job was working with the youth or teaching classes. And I was working under the main minister who did that.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's kind of that's how I got to where I am, I guess. And going back to ministers and priests and things like that, usually when you say priest, people think of a Catholic priest. There are other traditions that have their clergy that they call priest, Episcopal or Anglican, I think is one of those. So yeah, in my tradition, you're called a minister once you go through seminary and ordained to serve in this capacity, and then your title is pastor of a particular church. So I'm a minister, and then if I'm working at a church at the moment, I'm the pastor of that church.
Okay, are you at the moment?
I am. Yeah, I'm in my 7th year at a church here in Indianapolis, in Indiana. And I'm the guy. I am the guy who leads worship every Sunday, preaches a sermon every Sunday.
And that's something you didn't want to do originally, but you found a love for it? Or is it because, I guess that's another question I want to ask you.
Sure.
How much of your daily routine and job is administrative stuff that is, I think people might think of
too much.
Right. Because people think of, religious leaders and they think, talk about God and do sermons and perform services for the community and funerals and stuff like that. But I'm guessing like running a church is a lot of paperwork as well.
Yeah, I will speak for my particular church, and it's not atypical. I don't have a large congregation. We average 40 to 70 on a Sunday morning, and that's not a lot. It's not the same 40 to 70. So of the folks who are kind of regularly involved in our church, there's probably 100, 150. But our church, it also houses a childcare, and it houses an adult day services, which is kind of for older adults who are not mentally well or physically unwell. Their families, their caretakers will drop them off for the day, and they'll get physical therapy, they'll get community. But that is a way to say I've got these 2 full-time organizations, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day in our building. We've got a part-time secretary, a part-time bookkeeper. And we have got a big building. So unfortunately, a lot of my time is a administrator or a landlord or a building guy.
So you're kind of a company, maybe not CEO, but COO. You operate the operation.
Sort of. I mean, in our tradition, we call it the session. It's like a board of directors for the church. And it's a dozen members in the church, and I am the moderator. And then they actually are in charge of everything.
Okay.
About the only thing I really have authority over is what I preach.
Okay.
Everything else they can make the decisions on. Now, practically, they're volunteers. They're not there every day. I am. So yeah, I'm kind of the de facto manager. I'm head of staff at the church. And, I oversee. The adult daycare is run through a different organization. They just lease space, but the child care is our ministry. And so I oversee all their staff and their director. I oversee our music staff, secretary. I do our building folks. So yeah, unfortunately, because I don't want to sit behind a desk and do emails all day and make phone calls and write papers and deal with crises that come up with the building. But that's a significant part of my job.
So, okay, I want to talk back about more about your actual job, but getting back to the relatively lax requirements for ministers as opposed to Catholic priests.
Lax.
Well, I mean, I go back to the celibacy issue.
Is it just the sex thing?
It's the only one I know. I imagine there's a lot of other ones.
I mean, that's significant. I'm not going to lie. And no, I'm not, if that was part of me being a minister, that's not what I'm called to. Okay. And I'm trying to refrain from. I'm not even going to do it. I was going to make some poor Catholic joke.
You don't have to. You don't have to. No.
But that's yes.
Right. Okay. So.
But that part of that is the theology of the Catholic Church, and I am not an expert in Catholic theology. But I mean, they believe that there is a theological significance to the office of priest.
Of course, yeah.
That we don't believe as Protestants.
But I think, I think that's kind of what I was trying to allude to without quite managing to put my finger on it. But it's more than just the sex thing is kind of a illustration of something deeper, that it feels like priests are almost removed from society in a sense, whereas you are entirely part of society and you share in the very common, I don't know how to put it, but duties or activities or structures of society as any other member of society would. The only difference, it seems, is you are the person that will guide some members of your community through maybe tough times or, shining a light and all of that. But there's a mystique, I guess that's a way of putting it. There's a mystique about priesthood that my impression is kind of absent from your activity, and maybe it's the whole Presbyterian Church, which I don't realize to what extent it is. But is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I think that is. And some of that is cultural. And I would guess in the Catholic Church, a lot of that is going away anyway. When I was in my church in Florida, which I think when you and I were podcasting, I think that's where I was.
Yes.
It was a more conservative and evangelical church. And we had a number of Jamaican folks in that church. And there was an authority or reverence I was given as the pastor by those folks that I haven't received in other churches. Okay. Yeah, there was one time I'm at a dinner party. Number of folks, there are 20, 30 folks at one of the homes of one of our Jamaican members. And there's food and wine being served. And, so I grabbed a glass of wine, and then the host, Marcia, comes up to me and she looks at the glass in my hand and says, "Pastor?" And I didn't realize, in her view as pastor, even though everyone else, she herself was having wine, for me to have it was not in her view of what a pastor was.
So what did you do?
I said, "Well, Marcia, everyone else is having it, so I assumed it was okay for me to have it." And
what did she do?
Well, I'm the pastor. She's not going to argue with me. I mean, I say that jokingly, but probably there was truth to that. I mean, she probably didn't like it. And had I realized that, would I have had the glass of wine? Maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, sometimes there's a place to make a point. Sometimes there's a point to be sensitive.
Right. Interesting. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about your daily life and get back into it. Let's say a typical day for a minister or a pastor, actually, since I guess you wear both robes.
Sure.
What do you do on a typical day from waking up to going to bed?
I wake up at 3 a.m. Spend 3 hours on my knees in prayer.
Oh, okay, no, right. That's, the second, I thought maybe you wake up at 3 and go play some video games. That could have been believable, but 3 hours on your knees in prayer, that doesn't match the Shawn I have in my head as an image.
Although, it's not me. No, I mean, I get up in the morning and my wife has to get to work earlier than I do. So I help get the kids ready, help make lunches, make sure they're on the bus in the morning. And then I head in to work, checking with my secretary. And then it's looking at my to-do list, answering emails that have to be done first. Ideally, now I'm going to tell you ideally what I'd like to do. And this doesn't always happen. Ideally, then, kind of first thing in the morning, since I'm kind of a morning person, I would like to spend a couple hours looking at my upcoming sermon or sermons beyond that, doing some reading, doing writing, doing research, because I'm called to give a TED Talk every Sunday,
right?
Something longer than a TED Talk. Mine are closer to 20 minutes, and it's kind of I don't want to say it's a burden, but doing that every single Sunday, it's like, oh well, I don't have anything else to say. And I want it to be edifying to folks. I want it to be interesting. I want it to be engaging and sometimes funny, and sometimes moving and meaningful. So to me, it's not just what I'm going to say. It's sometimes the easy part is figuring out what I'm going to say, and the hard part is figuring out how I'm going to say it. And we have a screen and projector that we use in worship. So I try and find videos to go along with it or images. So ideally, I would like to spend a couple hours every day working on that, looking ahead, thinking about, I do all the communication and publicity for a church. So thinking about how I'm going to let people know what's coming up, putting graphic design together, doing social media and website. On not every day, but a couple times a week, I'm going to go and check in with some of my members, usually some who are not doing well. We've got
actually
more
go to their house, or
usually not. That used to be kind of the thing that ministers did. They'd just do house calls. A lot of times they wouldn't even ask; they'd just show up. But people don't want that. So no, it's usually I'll schedule something ahead. I'll know someone had knee surgery and they just got home. Hey, can I come out Wednesday and just see how you're doing? If someone's in the hospital,
sorry.
Go ahead.
I want to dive deeper into that. You go to that person's house that just had knee surgery, and what happens then? Like you bring them something to eat, or you have a chat, you ask how they're doing and what's going on in their lives. Like it's a friendly visit, or is it a minister? Like what happens exactly when you go to someone's place?
It's probably 80% social and friendly, chit-chatting. How you doing? How the kids? How's your family? What's going on? But it's also, how are you doing? You just had knee surgery. How's it feeling? I'll always offer prayer at the end, and people kind of expect that. And I'll say,
when you say offer prayer, you mean pray there with them?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I'll always end with prayer, just a prayer for their continued comfort and peace and healing, even though I don't necessarily believe God works. God's not going to heal someone just because I asked, or God's not going to heal someone because I didn't ask. But we still believe it's important to bring things in prayer a lot of time because it brings things to our attention rather than to God's attention. But one of the other important things we'll do is say, what can we do to support you? Do you need meals? We've got folks who would be happy to cook you a meal and bring it over for a week. Do you need someone to help take you, to the doctor? Can you get there all right? That's one of the things that churches do that I don't know that a lot of people realize is we're just a community of care. If we know someone's going through a hard time or needs some help, we're there. Did a funeral at my church in Florida a number of years ago. And after the funeral, in our fellowship hall, just a gathering space in the church, we had all sorts of people from the church just cook and bring food. And we had a big reception, and they brought out the good china, and there was punch. And I was talking with someone who wasn't a churchgoer. It's like, who did all this? Do you hire a caterer? Like, no, the church did that. And they're like, I didn't know you did that. Is that special? Do you do that a lot? Like, well, we do it for funerals.
And when you say the church, you mean it's on church funds and church employees, or members of the congregation?
Members of the church, yeah. Right. Things like that. It'll just be, it used to be phone calls. Now it's just email. You just email and say, so
Can
and
you do
so
this? So who organizes
died.
it? You're the one who asks people to do something?
No, historically, and it still kind of is this. It's a little sexist. It's quote the women of the church.
Okay.
And sometimes there's a formal organization. My current church, there's not, but for me, it's Julie. I know if we need something, hey Julie, this is happening, and she'll put out the word, and we'll have people show up, and then they'll do it all. So yeah, I just tell Julie, and it's off my plate.
Okay. You mentioned your wife. She's a minister too, I understand.
She is. She is a minister, but she's not currently a pastor.
Okay.
We've served together in several churches. She's a hospital chaplain now.
Okay.
And she works here in Indianapolis at a Catholic hospital.
Okay, so the morning is underway. You have been thinking about your sermons. You've been visiting a couple of people a few times a week. Then there's lunch break. Obviously, you go to McDonald's and watch Netflix on your phone.
I do go to McDonald's sometimes, not as often or more often than I should.
Right. That's where I thought it was going to go.
A lot of times I just have my lunch in my office. I mean, there are meetings, and sometimes occasionally be meetings with other clergy in the community to plan some things. I mean, we live. Our church is immediately across the street from a Catholic church, so Father Michael and I will occasionally get together, or more often it's a larger group of clergy to plan something. The churches earlier this year planned a series of community dinners along with our neighborhood association. We had an incident of kind of some racist action at the end of last year, and we came together with the neighborhood association and said, we don't want this in our neighborhood. What can we do? And we did a series of once a month community dinners rotating between churches where we brought speakers in on race, talk about white privilege, to talk about, an organization within the community that's working to help. It's called the 10-Point Coalition. They patrol the streets at night, or they go to scenes of murder and try to help deal with the community. So, I mean, that's part of what I do. I don't know if there's a whole lot more to my day.
Well, it's already quite a bit.
I have evening meetings as well. I mean, in most churches, unless you're just rolling in the money and can afford a ton of staff, it's volunteers that do most of your work. So pretty much every Tuesday night, I'll have a meeting at the church of one committee or another. Fourth Tuesday of the month, we field a team at our local pub for a quiz night. So that's a fun meeting I get to do.
Okay.
But occasionally there's other things like and this is what's in my church specific. We march in our local Pride Parade every year, and so there's planning for things like that. We did a March for Science event, participated in it. So there's planning those other things. We have a university real close to us, and so I'll help. I'll bring dinner to their student council sometimes. They have an interfaith student council, which is many different faiths, even atheists, that come together to talk about religion. And as a church, we'll just feed them dinner some night.
Mm-hmm. It's funny because I think what you're describing is a concept that is pretty common in the US, but we don't really have in France, or really not much in any European countries I visited, which is community organizer and community leader. And would that accurately describe what you do or what churches do?
That would accurately describe what we should do.
Okay.
The reality is most pastors and church leaders end up planning more for their own congregation, their own people. We're trying in our church.
That's a form of community. I mean,
it is, but the church doesn't exist. There's someone who said, the church is the only organization that doesn't exist for their members. Like ideally, the church is there's a hokey little video out there that says, "Is your church like a cruise ship? Do you expect to pay your ticket and people to wait on you and get good service, or is your church like a battleship? Are you part of the crew? Are you on a mission? Are you out to go out there?" And I don't like the military image of the church, but ideally the church is not about paying your fees and coming in and getting goods for your money. I mean, ideally the church is about you serving God and serving your neighbor.
Right.
So you're coming in not to be taken care of, but to learn how to take care of others, especially the community around you. Now, historically, we've done a poor job of that. And our church in particular, we're trying to figure out how to reverse that. We've recently sent people out to the community to talk to business owners and neighbors and people in the university and service providers and say, what's going on in the community? What needs do you see? And how do you think a church could help? And so we're kind of doing a specific focus right now on trying to address kind of the anxiety that people have in their life, daily stress and anxiety, and then also some mental wellness issues, mental health, and figuring out what role does a church have to play in promoting mental wellness in our community. And we don't know yet. We're kind of figuring that out still, but we're trying.
You didn't talk about your children. How, I mean, that's a silly question, but how involved are you in your children's lives? That's not, it doesn't sound right. I guess when you get back from work, you're taking care of the children, and like once work is done, what do you do? I guess is a better question. Sorry if I'm focusing on the children so much, but as you mentioned, I have a 10-month-old, and essentially that has it engulfed my entire life. So that's where my mind goes to.
Yeah, it doesn't stop. It morphs, it changes. There's different phases, but they always engulf your life in some way, shape, or form. Yeah, I mean, fortunately, my job right now, I don't have a ton of evening meetings, about once a week, sometimes twice. So yeah, I can be home for dinner every night. We live close to the church, so even when I do have a meeting, I'm home. Depending what's going on, I'll cook dinner. My wife will cook dinner. The kids are around. They get home from school about 5. And at that point, it's homework. And then if they get their homework done, then they get to go play video games or play on the tablet or watch TV. And so while we're getting supper ready, they're doing that. We all eat supper. And then kind of our thing in the evening is we watch shows. We're kind of working our way through S.H.I.E.L.D. or Doctor Who right now. Sherlock is another one.
S.H.I.E.L.D. with your 13-year-olds?
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
I mean, there's some moments, but it's not too bad. I mean, it's prime time. It's not cable TV,
right?
Or Netflix.
So that's
and my son and my son, I've kind of, for better or worse, shaped him in my image. He's a geek, and he's a gaming geek. So he loves video games. He loves board games. Our thing right now, and has been for the past year or so, is Dungeons and Dragons. A lot of Wednesday nights we're at our family game store, playing Adventures League Dungeons and Dragons with other folks. We have some friends that we bring into our home to do that.
It's just so far removed from the image of a priest or religious leader that I have. And again, this is probably because most of my surroundings, there are priests rather than ministers. But again, I come back to that idea that priests are a little bit removed from society, even though they are probably, even them are a lot less removed from society than I make it up in my mind. But yeah, what you're describing is just regular dad, which might actually, it leads me to the question: what do your how do you know how your children relate to religion and the idea of being the children of two ministers? I guess that's totally normal in the U.S. But here it would be a bit, not weird, that's the wrong word, but
atypical.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah. We try as hard as we can not to make them think poorly of the church. I mean, they've always, especially when both Carrie and I worked at the church, they always had to come early and sit around and hang around a lot. You know, worship may start at 11, but we needed to be there at 9. So they got to hang out in our office. And usually that was, on a tablet or computer of some sort. So they really didn't mind. But we tried not to put any extra pressure on them because they're our kids. That being said, they will hear us talk about the church, and church, like any human organization, has its ups and downs. And like any work situation, you talk about the frustrating things, usually a little bit more than the positives. So it's possible they've got a little more kind of inside view of church that's not as pleasant. But we also try and show them how it's a positive thing and what the good things it's done for us and
how involved are they in the church? Like, do they come to mass every Sunday or?
Yeah. We all go to worship on Sunday, so they're there every Sunday. They've got, during the school year, they've got Sunday school, which is just before church. It's just kind of a gathering of a few of the kids. We don't have very many kids in our church, but what kids we do, they gather together with the great guy who teaches them every Sunday. So yeah, I mean, what they think about church and faith is kind of on a spectrum. I mean, demographically speaking, at least in America, and I'm sure it's worldwide, every generation is getting farther and farther from the church. And, I can't say that our kids are going to be the exception to that. I hope so. But if they are, it's not the end of the world.
So if your kids tell you, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to make this, believer versus atheist, but just out of curiosity. No, I'm just wondering if if your daughter comes to you one day and says, "You know what, Dad? I think this whole God thing is a little bit weird, and I'm not quite sure I believe in it anymore." I'm guessing you would be disappointed, but you're such a liberal person, you'd probably be, "Oh, it's fine. He loves you anyway. Whatever. Go have fun." But I'm curious what your reaction would be.
One, I would be thrilled that she came and told it to me in such a polite manner.
You don't think she would?
Yeah, no, I'm just teenagers.
Right.
Let's have a discussion about religion and faith.
Well, I was thinking maybe, she's 22 or 23 and, she's...
Oh, no, we've already had that discussion. I mean...
Okay.
No, I wouldn't be disappointed. I mean, part of me, just given the reality of the church in America, especially mainline Protestant, which Presbyterian is kind of part of, we have done a horrible job at reaching younger generations. We have not changed kind of the basic form of the church in 100 years. We're singing songs that are hundreds of years old on an instrument that is that old, and their liturgy, what goes on in worship, hasn't changed. So part of me says, I can't blame you, because the church has done such a poor job of representing a great faith to you.
But see, that's where it doesn't match my image. And there's always that, conflict between modernizing the church and the truth of the message and maybe not even the message, but form is part of that. Like, if you keep changing everything, and I'm sure, the Reformation is part of that debate, is it really what is left of the original true message or true?
Well, you got to separate the message from the method.
Yes, but if you change it so much that you don't retain any of the tenets, because you have to admit, but I mean, what you're preaching is very removed from the Christian Catholic faith, and you just shaped. One day, one guy woke up and he was like, I don't think that works so much. And so we're going to do it like this rather. And I understand the intent for this and the reasoning, but I do wonder, looking at it from outside, okay, so what does it even mean if you can just shape it differently to to adapt it to today's world. I'm not doing a good job at expressing it, but it's something very common, so I'm sure people get it, and I hope you do.
The question is, how are you shaping it? I mean, one of the things as Presbyterians and other people in the Reformed tradition believe, one of the catchphrases is "Semper Reformanda," always reforming. The church reformed and always reforming. But it's, how is it reforming? Is it reforming just because you want it to, just because culture wants it to, or is it reforming because as you pray and study and talk in the community of faith, you're realizing, hey, this would actually be we think this would actually be a more genuine expression of Christianity. Somewhere along the way, we kind of got off the rails and we thought having an organ in church, that was church. Well, I can guarantee you, Jesus and the early followers, they didn't have an organ in their church. They didn't have a church building.
Right.
I mean, part of it is this is nothing new. I mean, the church of the year 100 didn't look exactly like what Jesus taught. The church of the year 500 didn't look of the year 100. You know, what we are doing today looks nothing like the early church.
So you're trying to interpret the core, the essence of whatever you can glean of the message, understanding that the form is probably, maybe even I might go as far as to say that it doesn't really matter all that much. The form isn't, I mean, obviously if it's doing bad things, then it matters, but.
Well, then that's about the message, not the method.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, and I will be the first to admit, we're trying to figure out, you know, if you're looking back to Jesus, what a guy thousands of miles away from our culture, thousands of years away, meant. And we're trying to figure out what he meant and what he said and what his intentions were. And that's almost an impossible task.
You said a guy. Isn't that some kind of blasphemy?
No,
I guess he was a man, yeah.
Now, if I would say he was only a guy.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, no, one of the things the church has done a poor job of is lifting up the humanity of Jesus. He was a guy. He peed, he pooped, probably had wet dreams. You know, he laughed,
I'm half tempted to title this episode "He Peed, He Pooped," but I won't. But you make a good point. That's something I honestly didn't consider very much. But so yeah, getting back to,
if you want a fun book that goes kind of irreverently in that direction, and I can't think of the guy's name. The book is called Lamb. Christopher Moore. Yeah, and it's just kind of a tongue-in-cheek, but sort of good telling of Jesus and his best friend Biff, I think is his name,
right,
or something like that.
Okay.
And yeah, one of the things they bemoan all throughout is that they can't eat bacon.
That is a little bit unfortunate. I agree.
But it explores in a fun but sometimes thought-provoking way that human side of Jesus.
Okay, so your daughter says, "Hey, I'm not sure I believe in it," and you were saying maybe the church should adapt to more. My first reaction when you said this was, well, you're not going to start rapping your sermons, but then your reference to the organ that Jesus didn't have kind of makes sense. There's no reason you couldn't do it differently, and yeah.
And I don't know how true this is, but I've heard that some of the early hymn tunes that we use that are now 100-year-old classics, these very reverent things, were originally bar tunes. Whether that's true or not, I don't know, but yeah, no, I mean, you want to be authentic in engaging folks. You don't ever want to do something that's just like Will Ferrell and Sherry O'Terra on Saturday Night Live used to do this old couple thing. They'd go into schools and do these school assemblies with music, and they're like, "Hey kids," and
right, yeah, obviously.
Yeah, if my daughter said that, so I don't know that I would be disappointed. I'm certainly not disappointed in her. I might be disappointed that it happened, but then I would engage her like, "Okay, tell me, so what is this God you don't believe in? Because it's very possible I may not believe in that God either." I mean, that's something that happens all the time. It's like, well, I don't believe in a God who would do this or let this happen or let this. I'm like, wow, I don't believe in that God either.
Well, I was going to, the kind of absolute I don't believe in God, period. Not, I don't believe in this God or that God.
Sure.
But
and if it was just, and my son's more likely to do this, if he would say it just doesn't intellectually make sense. Yeah, I would say I'm right there with you. It does not intellectually make sense to me. I'm totally a product of the Enlightenment. I like rational, logical things. Why am I still a Christian? On some days, it's I ask that self my same question, but there's just a part of me that I can't explain it. Maybe it's just brainwashing when I was young, but there's a part of me that just, I don't know. And the other for me, it's still the community, though. I will always come back to the power of the community. And some people will say it doesn't matter whether there's a God or not, because there's a community that is centered around that God and the teachings. And I get a little iffy once we reduce Christianity simply to a set of teachings that some dude came up with a couple thousand years ago, or even several dudes, maybe a few dudettes.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Your faith seems so. It's very convenient if you're a more intellectually rational-minded person. It's kind of, there is nothing, it seems, from what I understand, that you can't kind of reconcile with a more intellectual trials with there. As you said, there isn't like heaven isn't necessarily a place you don't quite know. There's a lot of vagary that means you don't have to. And I don't mean that in a negative sense at all. I hope people don't take it like that. But you don't have to kind of take its stance on, well, this is how it is. And this thing that it is provably false, right? Or provably, or not provably, but intellectually difficult to reconcile with what we know. So yeah, it seems like it's easier to to integrate in your life than maybe some other types of faith if you're prone to doubt, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, there are two ways to approach it. I mean, some people want a faith that is black and white. They just want their faith to say this is right, this is wrong, this is what you believe, this is what you don't. And for some people, that's reassuring and that suits them well until it doesn't. But for me, I have this tension of, I've got some pretty strong things that I think I believe and I don't believe, and sometimes that butts head up against my Christian faith, and especially intellectually, I'm like, how can there be this eternal God, and what is God like, and does God actually have a will, or is it just more this kind of universal force? And there are certainly days I'm like, it makes much more sense, go to the Occam's razor thing. The simplest explanation is there's no God. Although then I wonder where matter came from. But if there is a God, I wonder where God came from. But so anyway, but for me, at the end of the day, why I need Christian faith, or at least the Christian community, is going back. I don't trust myself in a vacuum alone to make good moral decisions. I mean, generally, yes, but I'm going to have blind spots. I'm going to need people to educate me and correct me and call me out when I'm doing something I shouldn't have. And I'm not saying the Christian church or community of faith is the only people who will do that, but they may be the only people organized to do that. I mean, we all have social networks, and Twitter will be very quick to call you out when you publicly stray. But I like the fact that when it's working as it should, the community of faith is there to help you be the best person you can be according to the beliefs and the morals that are important to you. And for me, that's what comes down to the end of the day, is I have this certain understanding of right and wrong and justice and compassion and empathy. And left on my own, I'm going to do a poor job living into that. Put me in the Christian community, they will help me do a better job of that.
That's interesting. It's very it's very beautiful the way you put it. So Okay, so before we conclude the show, I do want to ask you about your sermons, and how you touched on this a little bit earlier, but I want to know more. How you come up with them, what do they consist of, and maybe if you can give us a few examples of in the past few years things that have inspired you, or not inspired you, but something happened in the world and you thought, I have to talk about this on Sunday.
Sure.
And sometimes things that were difficult to talk about and you didn't know how to approach, or because I'm guessing this is the one that has the most, maybe not the most important, but the deepest impact or the deepest significance in your job, because that's a time every week when you tell the people that follow your faith, kind of, maybe not teach right from wrong, but it's your TED Talk, and that's a big thing every week.
Yeah, and if you think about that, that's really weird. I mean, what other place do people come together to hear oftentimes the same person exhort them week after week? I mean, that's just really, that's kind of unique in our society. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know. And I think we need to move towards models of sermons that are actually more participatory and dialogue rather than just one person speaking. But
well, you were talking about social media earlier. I would urge you not to go that route, because if you give everyone a voice, then you end up with a cacophony. So
yeah.
But yeah, I get your point.
One thing so there some ministers will preach off what they call the lectionary, which is a 3-year cycle of scriptures that, okay, on this Sunday, here are 4 scriptures you can choose from. On this Sunday, the next Sunday. And the idea is that over those 3 years, they cover a larger portion of scripture, important things. They're timed with Christmas and Easter. I used to do that. And so it would just, okay, what scriptures are available to me to the Sunday? Okay, here's this one. As I read it, what message is coming out? Okay, that's what I'll preach. The way I do it now more is topical. I look ahead and say, okay, is there a topic that I feel people want to hear about, need to hear about? And we'll kind of say, okay, so I will spend 4 weeks doing this. I will spend 3 weeks doing this. At the beginning of January, I'm going to, and a lot of ministers do this, and a lot of ministers will make their material available. And so I'm going to be doing a sermon series based on, I will write my own sermons, but it will be based around a series of sermons that Reverend Adam Hamilton at Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City did, called Unafraid. And it's dealing with kind of the fear and the anxiety that's kind of part of our daily lives, and how as Christians we can look at that. And so I'll spend a few weeks on that. Another series I did, actually by the same guy, he did a great sermon series called Half-Truths, Things the Bible Doesn't Say. And it was things like taking sayings like, God helps those who help themselves. That's something that people will often attribute to the Bible that's nowhere near in the Bible. And it's actually counter to what the Bible says.
Really?
Or
it's not in the Bible?
No, I want to say that may have been like Benjamin Franklin. I can't remember if that was the one. No, I mean, I would say the Bible says God helps those who can't help themselves. But, when you're at your worst, that is exactly the moment that God is there for you when no one else is. I've done a sermon series on the big questions. And I would take a question that people ask about Christianity. Is the Bible true? Is science the enemy of faith? Is there a hell? So it just depends. So I tend to do more topical. Now, every now and then there comes something that happens in the news that I have to throw out what I was going to preach that Sunday and rewrite a sermon. The sad thing is that used to be mass shootings. But now if I changed my sermon every time there's a mass shooting, I'd be doing that monthly. But there was a time where, this horrible thing happened, in Arizona, and all these people shot, in Orlando, in Vegas. And that's on everyone's mind. So how can I not preach about that? How can I do what sermon I was going to be doing, and I do that?
So what do you say when that happens?
Oh gosh, at first it was, how do we make sense of it? How can there be this evil in the world? As I go on, and it happens over and over, it's what do we do about it? What is our role in trying to not make sense of it, but
do something about it.
Yeah, there's a quote, and I can't remember exactly how it goes, but essentially, the question for Christians isn't why God allowed this evil to happen or why did this evil happen, is what are we going to do about it? With the rise of Trump, I have felt the need occasionally to address specific actions of our president, which gets into dicey territory. But after the first immigration ban, I felt I couldn't ignore that, and rather than preach about the immigration ban, I preached about the attitude behind it. It's like, a lot of this comes out of this fear of the other and this dehumanizing of immigrants. And regardless of what you think policy-wise we should do, that attitude is so unchristian. And I may have lost a member or two over that, but oh well.
So what happens when that is not part of the questions I wanted to ask, but what happens when you have that division that is so incredibly strong and prominent in the U.S. right now that seeps into your congregation? I don't know if it happened or if it didn't, but if it did, how do you deal with that?
Well, I'm fortunate that the church I serve right now is a fairly good match for me politically and theologically. And part of that is intentional. Our church that we served in Florida before this was not a good match. We knew that going in, but we didn't realize how much of an issue it would become.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
Okay.
How did it become an issue?
It was a definitely more evangelical conservative church, and we were not. My wife and I were co-pastors there. And at that time, our denomination was debating whether or not you can be gay and be a minister. And they decided they could while we were there. And our congregation didn't like that. And our congregation, for the most part, didn't like that Carrie and I supported that.
How did that take form? So, if I don't want to pry, but I'm curious how
that's
these
fine.
Things work.
There were people who wanted us fired. That didn't get traction. A number of people left the church, and that hurt our budget. I mean, they were people who supported the church financially. And actually Carrie's position had to be eliminated, so she ended up losing her job over it. So when we were searching in the Presbyterian Church, we don't get appointed it's kind of like a job interview. The church interviews you, you interview them, you decide mutually, hey, yes, we want to be together. Kind of a dating service, I guess. And
when you say the church interviews you, it's the people who come to church?
A committee. We're all about committees in the Presbyterian Church. So yes, it's a committee of folks appointed by our board of directors. And we were very upfront when we searched. You put out kind of a resume kind of thing, and we said, this is where we are theologically, politically. We don't need everyone to agree with us, but you need to know we're not going to hide this. And so if that makes you uncomfortable, you're probably not the church for us.
But so the Presbyterian Church, you said there's a lot of voting and all of this, and the Presbyterian Church decided you can be gay and be a minister.
Yes. But
the church you were at before, the members didn't like that.
Right. What the church decided at that time actually was that, and this speaks a lot to how we organize, is that each church could decide.
Ah, okay.
So, and a number of churches, and this is happening in many different denominations in America and worldwide, churches are wrestling with this issue, and it's causing splits and people to leave the church. And we lost a number of churches from the Presbyterian denomination at that time, which has moved us a little bit further to the left. I mean, we recognize same-sex marriage now. And like I say, for my church, that's not really an issue. We have a banner we put out sometimes with the rainbow flag on it. And
you mentioned you participate in the Pride Parade.
Yeah. So it's not an issue for our church. There are a few folks in it who it sort of is, but they understand they're in the minority and then they're not making waves.
And they're they're managing to reconcile their. I mean, they're saying, okay, I don't think that's right, but I understand the majority decided this, so fine, whatever. And they just maybe won't come to a wedding between two people of the same sex, or like it doesn't transform into an open conflict.
Right. It doesn't. I mean, at this point, I mean, one, it's not the center of who we are. For some churches, it is. But yeah, it's one of many things, and there are plenty of other things about the church that these people like. They've been part of the church. They have relationships. They like the fact that we're have a strong tutoring program at a local urban school. And they would help with Cub Scouts there, things like that. So
okay,
like I could deal with that as long as we're doing these good things.
Okay. All right. Well, I think I ran out of questions. I get the sense that I have a better idea, a better vision of what you do and what being a Presbyterian minister means in your.
All right. So I have a question
case.
for you, Patrick.
Sure.
If you died today, do you know where you go? Do you want to accept Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior?
I would.
Sorry.
I mean, I think that's the tragedy of people who don't believe in God. I think I would love to believe in God. It's so much more reassuring. I don't want to say easier because I don't think it's easy, but it feels so much better than thinking.
It's harder.
I'm sorry?
I would argue it's harder.
Sure. I think for some people it's harder. For some people it might be more, the comfort that it brings to know that you're going to go somewhere, even if you don't know quite what it is, and you're going to be with your loved ones or at least feel their presence. And, that's reassuring. For me, what I currently think, I'm not, 100%, but I'm guessing that's it. You're just dead in the ground. And that's not a happy thought, I mean, I understand that it doesn't matter to me once I'm dead because I'm dead.
Right.
But it's still.
But it matters to you now.
Yeah, exactly. So I would love to accept Jesus Christ as my love and Savior, except I can't. And I have a lot of respect for the church and religious institutions in general, to the point that I have a hard time. There are things like when you get married, if you're the question was raised when I got married, because I got married. My wife is a Christian, and we got married in a church, and I was a little bit apprehensive about what the church would ask of me in order to allow us to get married there. And I was very apprehensive because I didn't want to be dishonest. So if I was asked to say things that I didn't believe in, or that I would be asked to do things in the future that I didn't want to do, or that I knew I wouldn't do, it would be a real problem, because I didn't want to lie or be dishonest just to get married, because whatever, there isn't even a God, so who cares? There's still a level of, and that's very personal, I'm sure, different people think different things, but there's a level of respect that I don't want to be, I don't want it to be offensive to the people that believe in this if I do something willy-nilly and not respectfully, So there were these questions that were hanging around. And yeah, I that doesn't really have anything to do with your question, but I guess where it does is I would love to believe in God, but I can't, out of respect for God and for me. It's kind of weird, but
No, I mean, I don't think that's weird at all. I think that's normal. The only thing I meant about it being harder is, I think if you truly going to say, hey, this Christianity stuff makes sense, there's a lot of hope and reassurance in it, but there's a lot that's asked of you. Like, it sucks to be told to turn the other cheek. It sucks to be able to be told that, we're called to forgive people. I mean, Christianity, if you're doing it right, it's hard, and it's much easier sometimes. Just like, I'm a generally an okay person, but when I drive, I am the least Christian person there is. And I feel bad about that. I'm like, okay, yeah, I should let this guy over who's trying to merge around me at the last minute. I should let him in. That's the Christian thing to do. But what an asshole. I can't believe he's trying to swerve in. So no way I'm letting him in. So that's all I meant about being no comment.
Okay.
So that's all I meant about it being harder. Right. Not that you can't hold yourself to a high moral standard without faith, because you absolutely can.
Right.
But if you do the Christianity thing right, it ain't easy.
I think there would be a whole episode to do about that, and how you can try to do it anyway, and how you can. I think for a lot of people don't understand how atheists can be atheists, because they think there's, it's difficult to be moral without that compass. And I think there would be a whole episode to do about that as well, and maybe dispelling this idea. I don't know. I mean, I think it's silly because I understand the way I work, but I think if you've grown up in a system where moral is assimilated to a certain system of beliefs, I think it's very easy to think if you take away that system of beliefs, the morality goes away with it. The morality and a whole lot of other things as well.
Right. It's very easy if you're raised in a faith and that's all you know, to assume that's why you have your moral compass.
Right. And I think a lot of people throughout the world, and I'm not just talking about the US, but the majority of the world is religious. And religion plays, and faith in particular, plays a very large part in societies and communities throughout the world. So even though atheist people are more and more numerous, we're still the minority. Even though maybe I should have looked that up, but this is not the point of this show. But I'm wondering if there aren't.
I think you're right.
I'm wondering if there aren't more atheists in the U.S. than any other, religion, or not other religion, because atheism isn't.
Right. No, that's not the case. That is the fastest growing religion, if you will, in the U.S., but it's not a majority yet. Okay. Maybe a plurality soon. I'm not sure.
Well, yeah, and that's a whole different thing. But I'm reminded as well of a number of friends who were telling me, American friends who were telling me, I don't really believe in God, but I can't really say that to anyone. And it was very interesting to speak to them, because they felt like they could speak to me, and it was like a pressure valve, because I'm in France, we have a lot of. Anyway, that's a whole lot. That's a whole different discussion, and this is not what this is about. But yeah. So, is there anything you would like to add? Maybe something I missed, or you would like to say before we conclude the show?
I don't think so. I think you were very thorough in your questions, and I expected you to grill me a little bit more. I was looking for that. Every now and then I go back and listen to a How I Wow episode, and sometimes there's those Patrick moments of just asking that hard question. It's like, oh, did he really say that?
Well, I like to think and feel that I've grown as a podcaster, and I also like to think that I try to understand what the show is really about. And I mean, the individual episodes, and sometimes questions that come to the minds of listeners. And sometimes people tell me, you should have said this or asked this. And
sure.
And I think sometimes the question that comes to your mind isn't necessarily something that will serve the purpose of that discussion, right? It's something that you want to say, but you can't lose sight of the ultimate goal of this specific discussion. And there will be places and occasions for talking about these other things as well, and they will be addressed then. So maybe that's why I'm being kind, angelic Patrick, as opposed to devilishly handsome and devilishly mischievous Patrick. Although, to be fair,
you have matured well.
I was going to say, to be fair, I'm always devilishly handsome.
That is true. And it's not just the scarf.
Well, that is as good a conclusion as any to this episode. So thank you very much, Shawn, for being on the show. You mentioned you have a Twitter account. Maybe you want to give it now for people who might want to get in touch with you?
Sure. It is incredibly creative. It is Shawn Coons, ShawnCoons.
And
be kind.
The link will be in the show notes. I'm sure everyone will be extremely kind.
I expect nothing else from your listeners.
I'm not Patrick on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can find this show at FrenchSpin.com. Please feel free to come on the article for this episode and leave a comment if you have something to say, if you have something to add, or if we said something you disagree with, feel free to come and let us know. And if you enjoy the show, please also feel free to contribute financially to the show at patreon.com/The Phileas Club. The link is also in the show notes. You can go there and subscribe in literally 2 minutes if you are not a Patreon member. And if you are, it will take you like 15 seconds. And this is the way I finance the show. So if you enjoy it, if it brings something to you, please do consider maybe throwing a couple of bucks our way. Thank you very much to the people who already do. That's going to be it for us. We will be back, I hope, towards the end of the month. We'll see with the holidays if we manage to do an episode. And we'll talk more about the world. That could be interesting. Thanks a lot. Talk to you soon.